Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
Donald Trump has created the conditions you see on your TV tonight. He's exacerbated the conditions. He's, lit the proverbial match. He's putting fuel on this fire ever since he announced he was taking over the National Guard. An illegal act, an immoral act, an unconstitutional act, and we're going to test that theory with a lawsuit tomorrow. Well, under his executive order, it specifically notes, and under what the DOD did, is they had to coordinate with the governor of the state. They never coordinate with the governor of the state. I've worked with the National Guard. We've deployed the National Guard. We did 3,000+ folks have been doing logistics work and fire recovery work, and they're fighting the fires, the rattlesnake teams. We did the same back in George Floyd. We have no problem working collaboratively in a mutual aid system with local law enforcement, but there's a protocol, there's a process. He didn't care about that. And the worst part, he completely lied. He said in a tweet that everything's now safe, everything's fine. Is that the case, Mr. Trump? He said because he deployed the National Guard. The Guard hadn't even been deployed when he said this. It's Orwellian. Simply lying to people. Unconstitutional, illegal act. His mess. We're trying to clean it up.
Thousands of National Guard troops and Marines have descended on Los Angeles to sit in buildings with nothing to do, no orders, and apparently no food or water either, according to California Governor Gavin Newsom. But President Trump and Pete Hegseth are sure enjoying flexing their muscles and pretending to be tough. In addition to sending the military in to intimidate mostly peaceful protesters, they've tossed around the idea of arresting California Governor Gavin Newsom.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? And he knows where to find me. But you know what? Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people. They're just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror, the hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting. So, Tom, arrest me. Let's go.
So with all the chaos going on, one of the things that is happening is that Trump and his people are characterizing those who are protesting as these violent, wild leftists out there. And they're not really being honest about the fact that these are mostly peaceful protesters, and they're not being honest about the reasons these people are protesting. So why are these people going out? Are they just these wild, out-of-control liberals?
California is no stranger to immigration enforcement, but instead of focusing on undocumented immigrants with serious criminal records and people with final deportation orders, a strategy both parties have long supported, this administration is pushing mass deportations, indiscriminately targeting hardworking immigrant families, regardless of their roots or risk. What's happening right now is very different than anything we've seen before. On Saturday morning, when federal agents jumped out of an unmarked van near a Home Depot parking lot, they began grabbing people, a deliberate targeting of a heavily Latino suburb. A similar scene played out when a clothing company was raided downtown. In other actions, a U.S. citizen, 9 months pregnant, was arrested. A 4-year-old girl taken. Families separated. Friends quite literally disappearing. In response, everyday Angelenos came out to exercise their constitutional right to free speech and assembly, to protest their government's actions. In turn, the state of California and the city and county of Los Angeles sent our police officers to help keep the peace. And with some exceptions, they were successful. Like many states, California is no stranger to this sort of unrest. We manage it regularly and with our own law enforcement. But this, again, was different. What then ensued was the use of tear gas, flashbang grenades, rubber bullets, federal agents detaining people and undermining their due process rights. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets, illegally and for no reason. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began. He doubled down on his dangerous National Guard deployment by fanning the flames even harder. And the president, he did it on purpose.
There were a number of things that spurred this on. Trump, in his immigration talk, he talked a lot about how these people that the federal government were going to deport were violent criminals. They were going to start with the most violent among us. But there was always this tension there because we all knew they wanted mass deportations of other people. At the RNC convention, there were signs all over the place that said mass deportations now. We always knew it was going to be much bigger than it was, but, apparently a lot of people supported Trump and believed that it was just going to be the violent criminals. But unfortunately, that's not exactly what has happened. Trump and his immigration officials have gone after farm workers, people who provide food for us, and if they weren't doing that work, our costs would go up much higher. Not only have they taken farm workers, but they've taken people who are showing up for their hearings. These are not people who are trying to skirt the system. They're not trying to get away with taking from our country. They're not mooching off of us. These are people who are going to appointments regarding their immigration status. And while they're at their appointments, following the law, they're being taken. We're constantly told, well, if you just come here legally, then there's no problem. Well, there is a problem because people show up for their hearings and then they're separated from their families. They've also gone after restaurant workers. You're sitting there eating with your family and all of a sudden your server's gone. The people preparing the food are gone. You have these unmarked cars that are just showing up with people with no badges or hiding their badges, literally kidnapping people right in front of you. It's like we have no concept of the fact that, as cruel as it is to the people who are taken, what about the kids in the restaurants who are seeing this happen? How traumatizing is that going to be to them? But of course, we are talking about Trump's supporters are white evangelicals who tell 4-year-olds about eternal conscious torment, so they're not exactly that concerned about traumatizing kids. Speaking of traumatizing kids, there have been ICE raids at Los Angeles elementary schools. They've entered elementary schools trying to find undocumented students. When school officials have denied their entry, the ICE officials have said they were simply concerned over student safety and that they were welfare checks and that they had permission from the parents to check on the kids. But none of that was true. And they're specifically targeting young elementary kids and trying to take them away at school. They've also threatened arrests at high school graduation ceremonies. Parents are afraid to go to their kids' graduations because they're afraid they're going to be arrested at one of the events that should be one of the happiest moments in their lives. You've raised your kids all the way up to this point. They're finally graduating from high school, and you're afraid you're going to be taken by the government. And so schools are having to train their staff with the security measures they need to take and with know your rights information. And they're having to try to calm the fears of families so that they can enjoy their kids' graduation. We're not talking about hardened criminals here. There was also a 4-year-old with a terminal illness that they targeted named Sophia. She was suffering from a terminal illness and had been in the U.S. for a while. Her medical condition is literally a matter of life and death. If she's not receiving this treatment that she needs, then her body could give out and she could die within days. And so she's under the threat of deportation. And it ended up leading to a lot of national condemnation. And critics were being very loud against the Trump administration because if she were to go to Mexico, then the treatment she was receiving, she could not get there. It would be literally a death sentence for this 4-year-old for them to deport her. And thankfully, with enough outcry, they gave in and let her live. There's also been ICE raids at Home Depot parking lots. Imagine going to Home Depot and all of a sudden you're seeing people run through the parking lot as they're getting chased by ICE officials. And it's not just officials that are showing up to take people. Again, a lot of these things are happening in unmarked cars with people dressed in plain clothes. They're not showing their badges, or they're hiding their badges when they're asked about who they are. This is completely over the top. Every single one of these things are totally worth protesting, because we cannot have a society where everybody is in constant fear of this stuff. And so Trump, he doesn't like the protests, so he sends in 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles without consulting Governor Gavin Newsom or the mayor of Los Angeles. So Gavin Newsom tweeted this. He said, "I was just informed Trump is deploying another 2,000 Guard troops in LA. The first 2,000, given no food or water. Approximately 300 are deployed. The rest are sitting unused in federal buildings without orders." And then Newsom said, "This isn't about public safety. It's about stroking a dangerous president's ego. This is reckless, pointless, and disrespectful to our troops." Trump's not even taking care of the troops who are there, let alone the immigrants or the citizens. At every single point of this story, Governor Newsom is correct. Donald Trump, he says, is inflaming these conditions. And this should be no surprise. Trump has long wanted to increase violence, not only against immigrants, but against U.S. citizens as well. Here's former Defense Secretary Mark Espe talking about what Trump wanted to do during his first term.
And it really caught my attention, and I thought that we're at a different spot now. He's going to finally give a direct order to deploy paratroopers into the streets of Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking with weapons and bayonets. And this would be horrible. He says, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something." And he's suggesting that that's what we should do, that we should bring in the troops and shoot the protesters.
Justice to these people is violence against human bodies. That's how they make things right. It's by being violent against human bodies. And if you're at all familiar with white evangelical theology, that's kind of at the heart of a lot of what they celebrate and a lot of what they look forward to after death, is making things right through crucifying a human body or through torturing a human body in hell forever. So Trump this weekend is planning this big military parade for Washington, D.C., where he's going to be watching from a reviewing stand while 150 military vehicles, including tanks, parade past him. At the same time, protests are going to be happening all over the nation for No King's Day, but there are no known plans to protest in Washington, D.C. Remember, Trump is the guy who once defended the Chinese government's violent massacre of Chinese citizens at Tiananmen Square in 1989. Trump said in 2016, quote, "When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious. They were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength." That's what this is about. It's about a small little man who wants to put on this picture of himself having power with strength, primarily through the threat of violence or through making things right with violence. And regarding any possible protesters in D.C. during Trump's military parade this weekend, Trump said, quote, "For those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with a very big force." And I haven't even heard about a protest, but you know, these are people that hate our country, but they will be met with a very heavy force. So as we consider how violent Trump wants to be, one of the things we need to grapple with is his relationship with white evangelicals. People who supposedly follow Jesus, who talked about turning the other cheek, and who chose not to be the emperor executing others, but to be the prisoner on the cross. Many people wonder why these Jesus followers would be attracted to someone like Trump. But the question we need to consider isn't so much why did white evangelicals choose to embrace Trump? It's why did Trump think he could attract white evangelicals? There are a number of reasons we could explore to explain this. I've already hinted at some of them regarding evangelical scripts of justice. But I'd like to share one story that I think illustrates Trump's targeting of white evangelicals quite well. In the year 2015, Trump had begun courting the attention of religious leaders, and he invited a group to his boardroom on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower in New York City. And one of the people that were there was the independent charismatic apostle Lance Wallnau. And Wallnau, on a post on Facebook, talks about how the meeting really focused on Trump and evangelical Christians both feeling like they were being persecuted by the media. You see this all the time through their anger and their demonization of the media, even today. So Wallnau said he remembers Trump saying, "I never punch indiscriminately. I'm a counterpuncher. If you get hit and do nothing, it sends the wrong message." And then one of the Christian leaders in the room said, "It's open season on Christians in particular." And then Trump jumped on that and affirmed their fears of persecution and went on a rant about how New Yorkers can't even say Merry Christmas anymore. Of course, none of this is true. White evangelical Christians are not the victims of persecution in the United States. And there are no laws against saying Merry Christmas. This is just Trump and white evangelicals riling each other up. So Trump tells the group, he said, quote, "Every other ideological group in the country has a voice. If you don't mind me saying so, you guys have gotten soft." And Wallnau said, "That's the line I won't forget." So Trump tells these men they've gotten soft. So here's a big key to this. Trump sees these men as beneath him. They're soft. They're not as tough as he is. They're not willing to punch violently to the degree that Trump is. But Trump wasn't finished sharing his thoughts. To the group, he said, "People who identify themselves as Christian make up probably the single largest constituency in the country, but there is absolutely no unity, no punch in exercising that power, not in political consensus or any other area I can see." So this was originally about getting people to vote for him. They're the single largest constituency in the country, he says. But there's no unity and no punch. So Trump is trying to find a way here, in his own words, to bring a voting bloc together, the largest voting bloc, and he's trying to unite them around something. And so as the meeting comes to a close and people are beginning to leave, Wallnau said that he took Trump aside and told him privately, he said, "The thing we need to do more than anything is to find a way of taking these 10,000 spokes and connect them into a hub of some sorts so that there is a unified voice. Our people here need to work together." And he says that Trump looked him directly in the eye and agreed. He said, "You're absolutely right. That's what needs to be done." And before Wallnau left, he said that Trump assured the group, "I will tell you this, Christians will have a friend in a Trump presidency." So Trump and the religious leaders agreed they were all being persecuted by media elites, that Christians were being too soft, and that the solution was to come together in a unified voice to punch back in an exercise of power by voting for Trump, who would give them the power they felt they didn't have. So while on the surface, Trump and the creators of the moral majority movement may seem to be very different, they actually speak the very same language, the language of hierarchy and highest power. Notice the way Governor Newsom talks about Trump in the same way BNG's Stuck in the Middle with You podcast spoke of the Southern Baptist Convention's Albert Mohler.
He's a stone-cold liar. I respect the presidency. I've tried to have an open hand with him, tried to work with him. You can't work with Donald Trump. You can only work for him. And I will not. I refuse to work for Donald Trump.
So then you went to Russell Moore, who was a favorite child who come from Southern Seminary, worked with Al Mohler there, but turns out he was not on board with...
By the way, no one works with Al Mohler. They work under Al Mohler.
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks for that image.
There is,
all right.
That Hydra has one head.
Yeah, so Russell Moore ends up falling out of favor because he becomes a never-Trumper and because...
In the world of empire, there is no working with the emperor. There is simply working for the emperor or under the emperor. Trump targeted white evangelicals because he knew they see the world through the lenses of hierarchy and power and threats of violence like he does. But he felt the evangelical men were soft enough and weak enough to bend their knee to him. And that is why we see Trump targeting white evangelicals, and he was quite right. They value the same things. They value power. They value making things right through violence, but they're soft enough to bend their knee to him. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.